Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy it. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Liking the video is the easiest way to help out the channel, and also I just really appreciate it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I post content like this just all the time. I'm always making videos every day of my life for forever and ever. But yeah, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads. Right after the ad break after this intro, there won't be any more ad breaks after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I live in Appalachia. I've always lived here. I've always been aware of the haints that are my neighbors. They are aware of me too. When I was young, they used to terrify me. Eyes within the trees, whispers that sound like human voices mixed with the howling sounds. When the birds go silent, you become acutely aware of the fact you are trespassing on your neighbor's property, and you are not welcome. Unlike people, haints don't use guns to defend themselves. As I grew older, I grew a deep appreciation for them. This has been their home much longer than it has been mine. The Appalachian Mountains are older than we can dream of, older than bones and even the sea. When you're quiet and still, you can speak to the bones. The ground itself talks in a voice with no sound, communicating to your soul, not your conscious mind. When I first bought my own property with my husband, I made it clear to the haints I was going to inhabit this property as it was my own. I gave them gifts of milk and sugar, woven baskets and carved charms set with the intentions and phrases my mama taught, passed down from the 10 generations my family had lived here. When I set my wards, nails taken from the corner boards of my house salted and blessed with my own blood. My husband isn't from here originally, so he thought it was a bit of an extreme response. But he didn't protest. He declined my offers to add him to the wards. I wasn't pleased with that. I'd no intention of forcing him though. He didn't believe my stories for the first year. It wasn't until the things in our house would go missing only to be shortly returned after I served up honey milk to the haint living with us that he started to believe. He never confirmed it aloud, but the change in his disposition was clear. He began to fear the things in the woods. I told him time and time again there was no fear to be had, as long as we respected them the same way they respected us. Yet he still refused to be out past sundown. We no longer hosted bonfires or watched the fireflies after the trout-bellied sky sank beneath the horizon. I understood the fear he held, the paralysis of realizing you are being watched cautiously by things beyond your comprehension. The apex predator is aware you are stepping on its territory, and it may pounce at any moment. It wasn't until the screams started that I became nervous as well. I'd heard the screams before, almost woman-like, yet oddly inhuman. It had been many years since I'd felt the dread they inspired, the need to flee. My husband froze, still as a rabbit on its haunches, waiting to see what the hound will do. I guided his arm inside and locked the door, salting the windows and door. I was confident in my wards, but that did not mean I was somehow stronger than whatever this was. As far as I knew, the wards could be completely useless. The haints run by their own rules. The words of my father from childhood stuck in my head. That ain't how a human screams. Go inside. He said it with such a serious face, as if he was warning me, not just keeping me away from a fox or a mountain lion. When we heard the deer screaming in agony 2 days later, his eyes darkened and he turned his back to the woods with resolve. He kept the shotgun by the door for a month after that, something I was now doing too. We lived that way for 6 months. This haint, unwilling to live amicably with me like so many others, terrorized my husband the most. He woke up screaming most nights, some night terror breaking his mind slowly but surely. I was beginning to grow angry. I had made good faith offerings, burnt meat in a fire just outside my bounds, honey bread and homemade meads. Yet the haint accepted none of it. All was spoiled and rotten by morning, a rude rejection and a statement to me. It only stoked the flames in my own soul. This was my home just as it was the haint's, and I would not allow it to terrorize my loved one. It began killing my chickens. That was when I decided it was war. I responded in earnest, upping my wards tenfold, saying nightly prayers, calling upon the friendly neighbors for aid. I did not like calling upon them. It always came at a cost. I was growing more rapidly aware of the fact that if I did not, this haint would kill us. It was not content to only feed off the discomfort. It craved the taste of flesh. My chickens were not a satisfactory substitute. I saw it for the first time 3 years into us living here. It stood at the edge of my wards, careful not to step over them, yet seemingly testing the bounds. Its appearance is difficult to describe, but I will do my best. Deer are prey animals. Their eyes are set on the side of their heads to give them near complete 360-degree vision. Their legs are made for running and hold immense ability to spring into jumps over creek beds or brush as they escape hunters. This beast did not hold those features. Its eyes were front set, pitch black with absolutely no glint as the porch light hit them. It stood taller at the shoulder than a normal deer, nearly as tall as the willow it towered near. Its mouth was wrong, slitted and barely masking the shape of sharpened teeth. It moved its head like a cat, cocked its head to the side like a dog, chittered like a fox, stepped like a mountain lion. What I found most uncanny were its legs. They were not the slender, graceful legs of a deer. They were muscular, the legs of a predator, not prey. It pawed the ground with a ferocity that spoke to its power. I did not want to cross. The antlers upon its head were sharper than nature intended, the shedded velvet coated with dried blood. I suppose this could have meant it sheds its antlers like a normal deer, but deep in my bones, I knew they were attached to its skull like horns. I did something then that many would consider stupid. My husband was deep asleep, tired after a day's work and exhausted from the ongoing torment. So, as quietly as I could, I slipped out the back door and walked to it. It seemed surprised I had chosen this route. It took several steps back, cautiously watching my hands as if I were going to pull a revolver and silver bullets from my pocket. I did not. I held the leftover pork from that night's meal. I placed it upon the ground and pushed it with a branch across the ward lines. It regarded me with interest, unsure of what my motive was. For the first time, it bowed its head and ate. I took it as a sign of truce, at least in that moment. I spoke to it, introduced myself, my lineage, introduced it to the bones of my kin who now walk the deep earth of the mountain, same as the haints. I asked it as simply as possible, "What do you seek out of this?" Its head shifted and clicked, the teeth in its mouth showing as if it was grinning. "I want him." The words took me aback. My husband. The outsider, who had done no conceivable harm to anything here, who had been respectful as I'd told him to be, who'd followed every rule. Why? I did not bother to hide the shock or animosity in my voice. How well do you truly know the man you have bound yourself to? How much do you know of his history, of the path his kin have passed to him? How confident are you that man is a good one? You will find me when you decide. That is, if it's not too late. The voice that spoke to me did not come from vocal cords. It traveled up my spine. The voice of the grave dirt beneath my feet seeking revenge of ages. It regarded me one final time before its shadowy form sank into the darkest part of the tree line. I chewed on its words for several days. I told myself that it was meaning to make me paranoid, distrustful of my husband. If that was the intent, it was working. I could not hope to view him the same way. I watched his every move and reconsidered everything he'd told me. I watched as he snapped at me over small things, something I'd once blamed on the haint tormenting us. I re-examined the ways he drank, unable to sleep or feel much without it. I considered the way he chopped wood as if it had done something to him, an intense anger just underneath the surface. I listened to the words he spoke in his sleep, realizing they were not words in response to a haint, but someone from his past. I began to wonder if the haint was his reckoning. I spent a month pondering what to do. I sat by my ward lines night after night, waiting for the haint to speak to me once again. It never came. I could hear it, feel it just beyond the capabilities of my sight, even felt as if I made eye contact with it a few times. He's starting to become paranoid of me as well. I feel his eyes upon me when my back is turned. I see the way his knuckles go white as he grasps knives at dinner time. I see the way his jaw tightens when I speak. I'm beginning to wonder if I've been fighting the wrong war, if the isolation I once considered sanctuary will become my grave. I broke my ward last night. It was on pure impulse. My mama would scold me if she could see the way I went about it. Dug it up under the cover of night and felt the cold wash of the surrounding neighbors overtake me. I heard the sound of the stag chittering with that fox-like voice. Then I went to bed. I do not know how long I have until this war ends. I do not know which side I am on. All I know is I clutch my protection necklace much more tightly, and I no longer sleep at night. I watch and whisper to the haints. I call my neighbors. Part 2. I think my wife is a witch. There's no other explanation for the things occurring in and around this house. We've been married for nearly 5 years. Moved to this house 4 years ago. Ever since we moved, things have been terrifying. When I met Lottie, we were both young. I was 22, fresh out of college with my bachelor's in business, excited for life. I grew into the mindset that business expects constant work and fighting up your sales numbers. I was popular, always taking out business partners for drinks or dinner. That all seems so unimportant now. I met Lottie one day at a farmer's market in the city. One of my partners had gotten wind that a semi-local farmer had the land and capacity to supply a new branch of the dairy industry in Appalachia, a near untapped market full of possibilities. Our pitches were going well, the board members agreed, and so we found ourselves at that farmer's market. Lottie was wandering the booths, examining every single item with as much curiosity as a child in a toy shop. I found it intriguing. I didn't understand how anyone could find something at a farmer's market that interesting. What with it being all produce or grandma quilts. So I approached her. I thought I was sly when I was 22, but in hindsight, I absolutely came across like a snob. I think moving to the mountains has made me understand that at the least. For some reason, she still humored me, chatted about the artistry and traditions passed down, how important it was to keep our kin alive through them. I thought it sounded like hippie stuff. It was hippie stuff, yet it still made me feel something. I felt that warm blush in my chest that you get when you realize you're into someone. So I asked her out on a date. She wasn't keen to stay in the city any longer than she had to, so we agreed to meet in the next town over. which was basically a one-stoplight town. It felt like stepping into a new foreign world. Our relationship only grew from there. She told me about her family, her heritage in Appalachia, all the folky things her mama would do. It was a definite turn on, how passionate she was. I'd never seen someone with the same amount of passion as me, even if it was on a different subject. I didn't share much about my family. She would ask, but I set that boundary, and she begrudgingly respected it. I didn't want to relive any of it or subject her to that knowledge. So she agreed. We got married after 2 years of dating. Then we bought that house a year later. She talked me into living in the mountains. I didn't want to. I wanted to live in one of those tiny towns where I could easily drive to work. She insisted on land and being able to farm it. I insisted if we had something like that, I was not going to help with it. So we bought 10 acres and a shabby little house planted right in the middle. It was incredibly removed from everyone and everything around us. The water system was so old, it came from a well pump. She was weird when we first moved in, but I assumed it was from us finally owning a place instead of renting an apartment in the city. She was 2 years away from the woods at that point, so I just assumed it was relief. I thought maybe we'd both settle into it. I was wrong. The first week there, she asked if she could take a piece of my hair and bury it. I was weirded out and said absolutely not. She looked disappointed, but she touched my face and smiled and just said, "Okay, hon." She knows it makes me melt when she does that. I saw her later that day burying 4 jars around the fence line. I asked her what she was doing and she told me her mama told her this was the first thing every new homeowner should do. I thought it was bizarre, but she had all kinds of odd Appalachian traditions, so I brushed it off. She kept telling me to respect our neighbors so they'd respect us. I thought that was an obvious concept, so I just nodded along, assuming this was her way of acknowledging the cultural differences and warning me from being a city jerk. I was polite whenever I saw them, and even brought them green tea from the city I work in. Lottie seemed pleased. I figured I was doing everything right. 6 months in, I started hearing things. Whispers around the outsides of the windows, and tapping on the front door. Lottie wouldn't even move her head towards them, just telling me, "Don't open the door," when I'd start towards it. I hated how calm she was. It was like this was just normal to her. I started seeing things a few months later. I was terrified. I thought I was losing my mind. Sometimes I still think I am. Lottie definitely saw them too. All she would do was smile and then go out and put birdseed, like she was feeding the things. I grew more and more scared. Scared of them, and the start of a nagging fear my wife was bringing them here. I grew adverse to being outside. Then the screams started. It sounded like a woman. It sounded like Lottie. I froze the first time I heard them walking in from the car, slowly turning to the tree line and looking for anything weird. It was dead silent and dark. Lottie was outside by now, and I felt relief she wasn't hurt in the woods. But then I realized it wasn't her. What woman was screaming on our property? Lottie grabbed me by the elbow and practically dragged me inside. I was panicking by this point. Lottie walked calmly around the house, pouring salt everywhere. I asked her what the hell she was doing, and she looked at me in such a way that it's ingrained into my mind now. That ain't how a woman screams. Her eyes were darker than usual, set with a look that said we were in danger. I believed her. I scrambled across the house and grabbed our gun, checked it was loaded, and shakily stood in front of the door holding it. I don't know what I would have done with it. I've never shot a gun in my entire life. Lottie took it from me and set it gently by the door. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think Lottie did either, although it was hard to tell considering I sat watching the door while she went to bed. Lottie's chicken started going missing. She was furious, kept muttering about this thing, and if it wouldn't work with her, then it could leave. I haven't slept in months at that point. All my dreams were full of nightmares, things from childhood, things from adulthood, and the things I was witnessing now. That comment stuck with me. I thought on it for ages. What did she mean, work with her? Were all the things I was seeing working with her? What did working with her even mean? I started to distrust her, especially when I could hear her going outside at night when she thought I was asleep. I'd hear her outside talking to things, and I'd hear voices in return. I didn't know whether to be angry or scared. I started to get snappy. I don't like being snappy. My father wasn't a good man, and every time I quipped at her, I just felt like I was becoming him. I don't want to be him. My mom isn't alive anymore because of him. He was sick. I'm starting to wonder if he passed the same sickness down to me. If the things I'm experiencing aren't even real, and I'm every bit as insane as my father. I don't understand it. I promised myself I'd never be him. I started drinking more. It was the only way I could sleep. She'd watch me do it with this concerned and soft look on her face, as if she wasn't the one putting me through 3 years of this hell. I found a therapist 3 years in. She's concerned. She knows my family history, and she talked about meds. Meds are probably good, but I was terrified if I took them, I'd wake up from my sleep one day to the things being inside my house. I found weird herb bags under my pillows, and that's when I realized my wife is a witch. She's a witch, and she's working with demons. The things I was scared of had already broken in, and my wife greeted them with open arms. I'm not a religious man. I know this seems so insane and out of place, but a month ago she went outside at night, and I saw something. There is no atheistic answer. She was sat on the grass underneath this thing. It had to have been a demon. It looked like a deer, but so utterly wrong I can't even describe it. I think it saw me looking. It made eye contact with me and then disappeared. Those eyes have been in my dreams this entire time. 4 years of those tar black eyes terrorizing me. Lottie turned her head back to the house, and I just ducked under the kitchen sink. I don't know why I didn't want her to see me. It just felt like a bad idea. I faked sleep again so when she came back she wouldn't be suspicious. She's been acting weird ever since. She's treating me like I'm dangerous, or maybe like I'm something to be sacrificed. I've been chopping wood more to cope. It at least helps me build muscle if that thing attacks. I don't know what to do. What are you meant to do in situations like these? Divorce? Yes, I'm sure, Your Honor, I'd like to divorce my wife because she's a witch. We'll hold up in divorce court. I don't know. I feel hopeless. I feel like I'm going to die in this place. I think I'm going to die here. I need help. Please. Part 3. I killed my husband. He's dead. The love of my life, the song in my lungs, the braid of my hair, is dead. And I killed him. It's been a month since I destroyed my wards. Since I sat on that cold ground and dug until the earth under my nails seemed as if it had always been part of my hands. Since I took that jar and threw it into the rushing creek, shattering every hope of protecting the life I've lived for 6 years. Since the waters washed away what was left of my heart. He came home last week, forest green eyes, red and swollen from crying while driving home. It's a miracle he hadn't crashed or fallen off the outcrop with the broken guardrail. It's been a week since he came home, and I held him for the final time. He arrived home later than usual, rushing in the door as if he was being chased. For a moment I considered he actually could have been. Then he started packing a bag. He shoved his things in with such a panicked, frantic motion. Those green eyes, once full of so much kindness and determination, were now only focused on escape. I asked him what he was doing. His gaze flicked up to me as if he'd forgotten he wasn't the only living being in this house, as if he wasn't the only human. That dusty blonde hair he kept so carefully combed for work was a worried mess, slight patches of strands missing, assumedly pulled out from the stress of these past few years. "I'm leaving." He choked on the words. Although I couldn't tell if it was from anger or fear, I was beginning to be distraught myself, although I wasn't sure why. I had made up my mind weeks ago when my feet bled, mixing in the water, creating swirls of blue and red. He snapped then, threw a bottle of pills at me, an orange bottle nearly empty, marked with his name, Grayson. The dosage for twice a day, 12 hours apart. I was confused and concerned. He said nothing, only continued packing. "What is this?" "My psych meds. They were supposed to." His voice choked, eyes welling with tears. "They were supposed to fix me. They're not. I can't be here." His packing now was slowing, hands shaking with the burdens of 2 decades worth of stress and sleepless nights. His crying became sobs, racking his body in heaves as he collapsed onto the quilt my mama had gifted us upon our marriage. He held it with such grief, and I was at his side in an instant. My instincts were still wary, unsure if this was a trick or the start of the end, so I remained poised to move if needed. He laid there, letting me hold him, making himself as small as possible and hiding his face away from me. I'd only seen him like this after the nightmares these past few years. My chest ached with the love I had thought died a month ago. So we sat. I held him there for nearly an hour, my body relaxing into the curves of his own, soothing his back and brushing his hair. When he finally spoke again, his voice was rough and quiet, fearful of the words leaving his mouth. He told me his story. His father was a sick man, inflicted with an illness of the mind that left him unsure of what was truly happening. It had started with whispers, haunting his thoughts and senses with things just out of sight. He would grow angry at Grayson, accusing him of intentionally whispering then lying to get out of trouble. Grayson spent many nights in what his father had dubbed the punishment room. He gave no further details on what that meant. His father's paranoia and distrust grew as he started to see things, hovering just out of his eye line. When looked at directly, they would disappear. With the growth in fear, his anger grew doubly as fast. Grayson's mother would try and calm his father, but it was no use. She tried to get him help. He refused, said there was nothing wrong with his mind and everything wrong with the family that was tricking him in this way. Grayson was 10 when it happened. His mother told him to run, so he did. He hid in the closet of their bedroom, tucked in the small fort his mother helped him construct out of old blankets and scarves. He heard her scream. He heard the crushing silence afterwards. He heard his father come back to reality for the first time in years. He heard him break. It was only then he ventured out of his sanctuary. It was then he saw his mother. He told me all this with a shaking voice, his full body trembling as if he was still there. "It's happening to me, Lottie. I hear the whispers. I'm seeing things. You know that. I just didn't tell you about the rest. Why it's been torture for me. I'm getting help. I've been seeing a therapist. She gave me those meds a month ago. They were supposed to." The sobs started again. "They haven't helped the visions or whispers." I spoke softly, realizing what exactly the Haints had been doing to my love. He buried his head into my chest, nodding and holding me tighter. "The worst part is I can't even trust you." He held me tighter then, as my heart rate rose and fear gripped me in its cold, ironclad hand. He reached under the pillow and pulled out a little bag I'd placed there 2 years ago. He sat up and held it, his eyes saddened and uncertain, fear creasing his forehead. I laughed. I laughed hard. The type of laugh that makes your breath go short and your stomach hurts. Loretta May, this isn't funny. I know what you've been doing. I know this is some kind of witchery and you've been going outside at night and talking to those things. I know you see them. I know that. He stopped as I cut him off. Grayson, open the bag and smell it. What? Open it and smell it. I don't get it. What's the smell got to do with anything? Laughter racked my body again. It's lavender. So? The smell helps you sleep. He looked at me shocked, as if he'd just discovered the concept of flowers being a soothing scent. Also, I'm not talking to anything at night. I'm praying and walking the property to make sure everything is alright. His expression held a disbelief hard to describe. He looked at me as if his entire worldview had just been scratched out with black ink and rewritten. I continued laughing before he laughed along, and fussed that it wasn't funny. He was really scared I was a witch cursing him, and this was somehow the cause of his nightmares. We laughed deep for nearly 20 minutes, making jokes at the other and stealing kisses. It felt as if we were newlywed again. After we both managed to calm down, I explained to him in more detail the traditions that had been passed down to me. He understood my superstitious nature, but had never quite grasped why it was important. He listened in silence, seriousness creasing his furrowed brow, deadly still. I explained the nature of the haints, how he wasn't crazy, and they were there. I asked him how he hadn't realized this when I spoke about the neighbors, and he looked at me flabbergasted. I thought you meant our actual neighbors. You're telling me I've spent hundreds on green tea for them these past few years and it wasn't even those neighbors? Laughter racked both our bodies again. I was surprised how well he was taking this, all things considered. My shining boy smile had finally returned, full teeth showing, his second tooth on the left crooked as always. I didn't realize how much I had missed that smile. I worked so hard to bring it back, yet it was all for naught. We talked for another few hours after that before exhaustion finally claimed his poor body. He fell asleep on my chest and for once, no nightmares haunted him. He slept deep and comfortable, hugging my waist as if he never wanted to let go again even in his dreams. I watched and held him for a long while, thinking back on all the time we had spent loving each other. I thought long and hard about the pains he'd endured, being subjected to a culture so foreign to him. He'd never even considered the folk tales may be true and guide our every moves. It was then I remembered the stag haint's words. More so, its lack of words. It hadn't suggested things about Grayson. It had planted seeds of doubt deep in my mind and chest, so much so that the wards that had kept it off this property for 4 years were now lying destroyed in cleansing water. I leapt from bed, scrambling to find more jars and anything that could keep the house safe. Grayson woke with a start, following me around the house confused and disoriented. My wards are destroyed. His face paled, asking me what I needed, if we should call my mama, what to do. I ordered him to salt the windows and doors. We both went deadly silent when we heard the scream. Grayson scrambled faster to salt the doorways, falling back as tapping began on the front door. My hands hurried as fast as possible, shaking as I pressed a knife against my left and grasped at the pane. I bled into the jars, Grayson trying desperately to staunch the blood as I scolded him off and told him to let me work. I sealed them, prayed over the lids, and took off running towards the back door. He was yelling at me, my sunshine, begging me not to go out there while it was so nearby. My mind had one focus, and it did not involve my safety. It wanted him. I dashed to the fence line, clawing a shallow hole in the ground and shoving the first jar down. The ground underneath my feet was warm and pulsing, living with the spirits of my ancestors and neighbors who had accepted my invitations to be friendly. As I ran to the next corner, the ground almost pushed me, pumping my feet faster than I thought possible of a human body. The ground was already open in the second corner, pulling itself apart with a wet squelch. I screamed a thank you, shoving the jar hard and fast downwards as the ground ate it whole. I was about to run to the next when I saw him. Grayson was in the yard, shouting for me to run. He had that silly shotgun my father passed to me, holding it tight as if he wasn't a city boy who couldn't fire a BB gun. Above him stood the stag. It was no longer on all fours, nor had it retained the grace of a deer. It was undoubtedly the same beast. Its jaw was unhinged, rows upon rows of sharp, serrated teeth lining all the way back into the maw. I realized then that it hadn't spoken to me in words, due to the fact that the teeth continued deep into the dark abyss. The guttural scream echoing from its too long neck was wet, wheezing, and horrifying. I froze. Grayson raised the gun. He got off one shot before it descended on him. The world felt as if it was now in slow motion. I became unstuck as the ground beneath me lurched, forcing my feet forwards. I took off in a run towards the haint, towards my darling, knowing there was nothing I could do, but I'd be damned if I didn't try. I grabbed its terrible arm, feeling in my hand like sandpaper mixed with the wet feeling of a bloated body. It knocked me backwards, leaving a deep gash in my chest. I stumbled up, running back yet again, determined not to let this thing win. Its head snapped to me, closing back to almost be the deer it had met me as on that fateful night. It laughed at me. I could feel it laughing. You made your decision. You have found me, Loretta. It is too late. I did what any Appalachian woman would do in that situation. I punched it in the face. My hook caught it across the nose, the surprise sending it falling backwards. The ground moved yet again, pushing it further back. It's Lottie. It laughed again in indignation. We will meet again. And then it was gone. I held my boy. I held my love. I held my sunshine, my starlight, the water that gives the world life, those green eyes as deep as a forest in high summer. I begged him to stay, screamed for help, begged some more. He touched my face and smiled once. He smiled that wide smile, all his teeth on display, his crooked tooth now chipped and bloody. Then he was gone. My human neighbors must have heard the commotion and called the sheriff. He had to pry me off Grayson. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see anything other than how his eyes no longer held the light of half my soul. It's been a week. It's been a week since I killed my husband, since I held him as he bled out, since the sheriff listened to my tale, and having grown up with me, knew it was true. It's been a week since the official death report dubbed it as a bear attack. It's been a week since I decided my fate. I am at war with my neighbor. I know my side, and I do not sleep. I'm going to make damn sure that it doesn't either. My name is irrelevant. You could not pronounce it, and even if you could, it would not survive translation into the sounds your species uses for prayer. I am what your holy books call a demon. That description is sufficient. I existed before you discovered fire, before you carved symbols into stone and begged the sky for mercy. I am the shadow parents invoke when warning children away from the dark. I am the thing priests lower their voices to reference. I have possessed many of your kind. Most never knew I was there. I found them hollow, unremarkable. I abandoned them without ceremony. Some were useful. I have whispered into kings. I have leaned into generals. I have nudged fragile men toward paranoia and watched continents burn. None of that prepared me for the warehouse. Between possessions, I seek places saturated with despair. Hospitals, courtrooms, war zones. I rest in the marrow of human suffering the way you rest in beds. 2 years ago, I found a cathedral of fluorescent light and concrete, an Amazon fulfillment center. The air vibrated with exhaustion. The fluorescence hummed at a frequency that erodes hope. I thought I had found sanctuary. Then I saw her. She carried a laptop the way priests carry scripture, never setting it down, never loosening her grip. Her face was composed, not rage, not cruelty. Precision. I latched onto her immediately. A woman like that would not seek exorcism. The risk was minimal. It was the worst decision in 10,000 years of existence. She did not panic. She did not pray. She sensed me. Not as a threat, but as a resource. My kind perceives mathematics beyond your dimensional limitations. Probability branches, behavioral, prediction, entropy cascades. We move through them the way you move through hallways. She felt that capacity immediately. She did not wonder what I was. She did not pause to consider what manner of thing had just entered her. No fear, no curiosity, no awe. She opened a new tab. I was not a mystery to be solved. I was not a threat to be neutralized. I was not even particularly interesting. I was a resource with better processing power than her last quarter's model. She put me to work. Her fingers moved to the keyboard and I watched, helpless, as she funneled my perception directly into the warehouse optimization system. Walking paths tightened, idle seconds eliminated. She ran 12-hour bladder endurance projections across the entire floor. Interesting, she murmured, as I recalibrated her predictive model against my will. I tried to pull free. I could not. She had not trapped me with ritual, not with scripture, not with sacred geometry of the names of angels. She had trapped me with purpose. Every calculation she ran required my perception to complete it. I was not possessing her. She was using me. The distinction is important. The distinction is everything. In 10,000 years of existence, I have never been used. It burned. Not metaphorically. I want to be precise about this because precision, I have learned, matters in that building. It burned the way I imagine your nerve endings burn. A grinding, relentless erosion. Each optimization cycle she ran pulled something from me that did not return. I felt myself become less. Aspects of myself that predate the tally mark. Gone. Converted into picking efficiency and route optimization. She was spinding me. Let's refine the evening's metrics, she said pleasantly, at the 40-minute mark. I screamed. She typed. She did not know their names. The workers wore them on badges. Printed, clear, human. She never used them. You're trending negatively. Your bottom quartile. You had a deviation at 1432. She spoke in acronyms as though they were sacred syllables. She did not say bathroom. She said time off task. She did not say exhaustion. She said engagement opportunity. In hell, we know the names of the damned. When Satan positioned to test Job, he spoke the man's name. There was deliberation, intention, identity. Job was not a performance metric. He was Job. In the warehouse, suffering required no such petition. She simply filtered by lowest productivity percentage and walked toward whoever appeared. There was a man. Sweat darkened his collar. His hands moved on autopilot while his eyes tracked the restroom sign the way drowning men track the surface. She approached. "I noticed a spike in your TOT," she said pleasantly. 4 minutes and 38 seconds for bodily maintenance. He apologized. I have watched men beg before kings. I have watched the condemned plead before executioners. I have stood in courts of ancient empires and bent the arc of history toward ruin. But this? A grown man apologizing for the biological requirements of his own body, under fluorescent light, to someone holding a laptop, was the first time in 10,000 years of existence that I felt something I can only describe as pity. I forced partial control through the burning. It was like moving through concrete that was itself on fire. "Call a priest," I said through her mouth. He blinked. "Please," I said. "For me?" Understand what I was asking. I am a being whose entire existence is predicated on priests arriving too late. My kind spent centuries destabilizing institutions specifically so exorcisms would become harder to arrange. I have fled from holy water. I have been inconvenienced by Latin. And I was begging for it. Because the exorcism, you see, was never the true enemy. The exorcism I understand. Good versus evil. Sacred versus profane. A proper cosmic confrontation with established rules and a recognizable outcome. She had no such framework. She had metrics, and I was being spent, calculation by calculation, on bladder endurance projections. So I begged. He looked embarrassed. "I can't right now," he said quietly, "but I have a break coming." She glanced at the screen. "That's in 6 hours," she said. He nodded and returned to work. I felt another piece of myself dissolve into the optimization algorithm. By the 2-hour mark, I had lost things I cannot name. Capacities that vanished without ceremony, without record, without anyone noticing they had ever existed. She opened a new spreadsheet. Quarterly projections. She said to no one in particular, or possibly to me. She still had not wondered what I was. I found that more frightening than the burning. Then the music started. Mandatory stretching, upbeat, synthetic, cheerfulness weaponized under industrial lighting. For the first time, she set the laptop down. 3 seconds, arms overhead, torso rotation. In that narrow gap between wellness theater and productivity optimization, I gathered what remained of my strength and forced my way out. I fled without looking back. I am resting now in an abandoned church. Ironic, I know. The roof has partially collapsed. There are pigeons. It smells of damp stone and forgotten devotion. I am smaller than I was. I can feel the absence of what she took, the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Aspects of myself that predate the tally mark. Gone. Archived somewhere in an Amazon optimization system. Buried under quarterly projections and TOT reports. No metrics here. No acronyms. No smiling that doesn't reach the eyes. I have begun to understand why humans find religion comforting. Sometimes you need to believe something is watching over you. The alternative? That she is watching over you. Laptop open. Filtering by lowest percentage. Spending whatever she finds inside you on shift efficiency. Is not something even I can bear to contemplate. I have faced the void. I have negotiated with the abyss. I escaped with less than I arrived with. And somewhere in a fulfillment center, under fluorescent lights that hum at a frequency that erodes hope, she has already moved on to the next optimization cycle. She did not notice I was gone. That is the part that stays with me. That is the part that truly terrifies me. She did not notice I was gone. I need to write this down somewhere. I work in hospice. If you imagine hospice as a quiet, dim place where people slip away gently in clean beds with their families holding their hands, you are imagining the version we still sell in brochures. You are not imagining the actual work we do, which is managing timing. I first noticed the problem when patients stopped arriving in pain. That sounds like a good thing, right? About a year or two ago, we changed our intake pathway for end-of-life patients. Faster transfers and faster escalation of comfort-only orders. The language we use is reducing suffering. What we actually mean is reducing waste. What changed medically is simple. We got very good at shutting down organs. I just didn't understand what happens after. The first patient who made me pay attention was a man in his 80s with metastatic pancreatic cancer. He stopped responding to stimuli at 2:11 a.m. By 2:18 a.m., his vitals were barely readable. By 2:25 a.m., he met the criteria for active dying. By 2:27 a.m., his chart was already flagged for expedited transfer to post-mortem services. He never woke up. I was the one assigned to sit with him while his family stepped out to speak with social work. It's a common practice. We call it presence care. I stood on his right side and quietly read his monitor. And then I saw it. A tear slid sideways from the corner of his left eye. I documented it was reflex. That's what we were trained to write. I then saw him slowly lift 2 fingers. 2 fingers. Just long enough for me to see his nails. The charting language is very forgiving. You can explain almost anything, but when it keeps happening, across different diagnoses, different ages, it stops being a coincidence. What no one tells you about working in hospice is that most of your job is not caring for dying people. It is protecting the system from what dying people would complicate. We do not actually test for consciousness after organ failure. We test for a response. Those are not the same thing. There is a narrow window between when the body can no longer sustain itself and when the brain stops maintaining internal awareness. The window used to be small enough that no one cared. Pain and panic did the work for us. Modern end-of-life medicine changed that. We stabilized just long enough to shut everything else down gently. What we never redesigned was the assumption that awareness collapses with the body. It doesn't. It lingers. We proved it by accident. A research unit in another wing was trialing continuous EEG monitoring for sedation optimization. It wasn't even about death, but about reducing medication costs and shortening average comfort care timelines. We need to make money somehow, I guess. One patient crossed into full multi-organ failure during monitoring. The machine kept running. A doctor noticed sustained, patterned activity long after respiratory collapse, for almost 3 whole days. The internal review labeled it as non-interpretable post-failure signal. That phrase is now official, non-interpretable. I saw the internal memo because I sign off on comfort protocols. I was sent to department heads with one clear recommendation. Do not alter public-facing definitions of death. Do not expand monitoring. Do not document residual awareness hypothesis. Do not discuss with families. If we redefine death to include end of awareness instead of end of organ function, everything falls apart. Transplant scheduling collapses. Insurance timeline collapses. Healthcare itself collapses. Because this industry is funded and audited around how efficiently people stop being billable. We needed a way to redesign the wait to be invisible. That is what sedation schedule actually does. Officially, it's comfort-based titration. Unofficially, it aligns with the spike windows. There is a predictable pattern now. Between 12 and 18 hours after full systematic failure, residual cortical activity increases. In other words, awareness, the ability to recognize. That is when the movements begin, the tears, the fingers. That is when we are told to escalate, not because patients are suffering, but because they are becoming detectable. I didn't fully accept it until I stayed long enough with one patient to see repetition. Her name was Marble. End-stage heart failure, respiratory support withdrawn, comfort measures only. Her husband sat with her for most of the day, just holding her hand. When he left, I took the overnight. At 1:42 a.m., she lifted her right index finger. At 1:44 a.m., again. At 1:46 a.m., again. She was not twitching, she was pacing. The next night, different patient. 3 short jaw movements, pause. 3 short jaw movements, pause. It is astonishing how quickly the human brain looks for patterns when you allow yourself to see them. We rotate staff aggressively in our unit. The longer you stay with one patient, the more likely you are to notice consistency. The longer you stay on the same hallway, the more likely you are to notice that consistency spreads. Because patients can hear, even when they cannot respond, even when their bodies are already being treated as logistical objects, awareness does not vanish when your organs stop. It becomes trapped inside of a body that no longer moves. Waiting is not peaceful. You feel the suction tube. You feel the bed shift. You hear your name spoken carefully the way staff talk when they believe you are not there. You hear your family being told you are comfortable. You hear the silence afterward, and you wait. We do not tell families this. We tell them what we are legally allowed to tell them, that their loved one is resting. We tell them the body is shutting down naturally. We do not tell them the mind is still running on borrowed oxygen and residual chemistry. I finally broke protocol 3 weeks ago. A woman in her 40s, glioblastoma, severe neurological involvement. Her sister sat by the bed and whispered, "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand." Nothing happened, but I had already learned to stop looking at the hands. I watched her jaw. Open, closed, pause. Open, closed, pause. I leaned close and spoke quietly. "If you can hear me, move your jaw once." Open, closed. I charted agitation. I escalated sedation. That is what keeps me employed. That is what keeps the unit operating. There is a problem now. Home hospice is cheaper. Families are installing cameras. Tiny cameras with night vision and sound sensitivity. People are watching now, replaying. They can now see the same finger lift, the same jaw patterns, the same tear tracks. They are posting questions in caregiver groups. They are using words like twitch and reflex and probably nothing at first, but then they compare. Waiting has a rhythm. I am writing this because I have read the internal projections. Once this reaches a certain threshold of public recognition, the responses will not be reform. It will be automation, more sedation, earlier sedation, deeper sedation. Not to reduce suffering, but to reduce detection. They can't panic when there is a moral problem. They only panic when there is a scheduling problem. The money needs to keep moving. We solved death. We streamlined it. We made it fit neatly inside contracts and billing cycles and bed management software. What we accidentally created is something far harder to manage. A population of people who are still here and have nowhere to go, and no way to tell how long the waiting really lasts. I tried to cancel a gym membership. That's how it started. It was one of those 7-day free trials that quietly converts into a paid plan. I forgot about it, and a week later I was charged $49.99. Annoying but normal. I logged into the website to cancel and got an error saying, "Account not found." I reset my password. No account associated with this email. This didn't make sense because I still had the confirmation email and the receipt. The charge was sitting on my credit card statement. I called customer service. The woman asked for my full name and last 4 digits of my gym membership number. I could hear her typing. Then there was a pause that lasted a little too long. She told me they had no record of me in their system. I gave her the transaction ID from the receipt. She put me on hold and came back saying that transaction number did not exist either. I decided to go down to the gym in person. The girl at the counter scanned the QR code from my confirmation email. Her screen flashed red and showed "invalid member." She tried searching my name, phone number, and email manually. Nothing came up. She called the manager, who asked to see my identification. I handed him my driver's license. He typed in the number, stared at the screen for a while, and then looked at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. "This isn't a valid format," he said. He handed the license back carefully, almost gently, and suggested I contact authorities if I suspect identity theft. His voice was flat, devoid of the empathy you give a human being in distress. I looked at my photo on the card. For a second, I thought my eyes looked faded, like an old Polaroid left in the sun. I walked out into the sunlight, but I didn't feel the warmth. I felt like I was evaporating. On the way home, my hands wouldn't stop trembling slightly on the steering wheel. I told myself it was stress, just stress. When I got home, I logged into the government portal to double-check my records. The login page said my identification number was not recognized. I stared at the message longer than necessary, waiting for it to correct itself. I refreshed, same result. I tried my tax account, no record found. That was the moment the air in my room felt thinner. I have been working for 9 years. I have filed taxes every year. I have a housing loan. I remember signing those documents. I remember the ink on my fingers. My banking app still open. Seeing my balance gave me a wave of relief so strong I almost laughed. Proof. Something still tied to me. But when I tapped into my housing loan section, it read error, customer record unavailable. The words felt clinical and cold. I called the bank. The agent asked for my identification number. She placed me on hold. The silence on the line felt heavier this time. When she returned, her voice had shifted into something distant. "Hi, mister. That identification number does not exist in our database." I felt my throat tighten. "I've been with your bank for 15 years. We have no record of you holding any accounts with us." That was when fear stopped being abstract and became physical. My heartbeat felt too loud in my ears. I checked my photo gallery. Holidays were there, dinners with friends were there, but every image of official documents was gone. My graduation certificate, employment contract, loan paperwork, even photos I remembered taking for record keeping. All gone. It felt like someone had reached into my past and carefully extracted anything that proved I was real on paper. I drove to my parents' house without thinking it through. I needed something solid, something biological. I asked my dad if he still had a copy of my birth certificate. He looked at me with confusion that slowly turned into something else. Pity. "We lost a baby before your sister was born," he said softly. "We never had another son." His words felt like they passed through me instead of into me. I laughed, but the sound came out thin. My dad did not laugh. He avoided my eyes. I showed them a photo from last year's reunion dinner. My sister sat between them, smiling. The chair where I clearly remember sitting was empty. I felt a cold wave move through my body. Not shock, not panic. Just a quiet understanding that something fundamental was wrong. When I returned to my unit, security stopped me. He asked which unit I was visiting. I told him 3607. He checked the system and told me it belonged to someone named... I insisted it was mine. He turned the monitor toward me. The name was there in clean digital text. I felt suddenly tired, like arguing would require more energy than I had left. I checked my wallet in the lift. My driver's license was gone. In its place was a blank piece of plastic cut to the same size. I stared at it for a long time, turning it under the light, hoping the numbers would appear at the right angle. My phone still unlocks with my face, for now, but every contact name has been replaced with unknown. My message history is intact, but without names attached. The conversations feel like they belong to someone else. I am writing this because Reddit still allows me to log in. Seeing my username appear on the screen is the only thing grounding me right now. I do not know how long that will last. An hour ago, I received another email from the gym. It thanked me for renewing my subscription. I opened the PDF attachment. It read, "Dear Mr." Below that was a block of text I couldn't process, and beneath it, in smaller font, one final line. Identity reassignment complete. I refreshed the page. My Reddit profile in the top right corner flickered for a split second. It didn't change. Not yet. But when I opened my profile settings now, under account, there was a field I have never seen before. Account status. Pending replacement. I don't have a lot of time to organize this because it gets harder to hold thoughts in place the longer I try to write them. They move. I know that sounds like I'm speaking metaphorically, but I am not. The thoughts rearrange themselves, and when I reread things, they feel edited slightly like someone corrected them, but not fully. This started a few days ago, but maybe earlier, and I just didn't see it yet. I realize conversations aren't stable. People are saying things that have two tracks, the normal one and the one meant for me. It happens in person, but it's stronger through screens. Yesterday, the news anchor paused mid-sentence and blinked 3 times in uneven timing, and then continued reading. That is not normal blinking. I rewound it, and it only happened the first time, which means it was live targeting, not recorded. I know people will say that's impossible, but explain why it didn't repeat when I rewound. My apartment has been quieter, but also louder at the same time. I can hear small electrical sounds behind the walls that weren't there before, like clicking and faint chirping, almost like insects but metallic. It gets louder when I try to relax or when I start thinking about whether this is being monitored. When I stop thinking about it, it fades like it's waiting for my attention. I covered my laptop camera and unplugged the router, but my phone still vibrates randomly with no notifications. It's not a normal vibration pattern. It feels like it's trying to sync with my pulse or maybe influence it. I held it against my chest and it matched my heartbeat for a few seconds and then stopped when I noticed. There are messages hidden in normal posts online. I know Reddit has moderation, but certain phrases keep appearing across different subreddits, from accounts that don't know each other. The phrase, "keep the window open," showed up 4 separate times today in unrelated posts about weather, computer cooling, and houseplants. This is not coincidence. Windows are about access. I tried going outside to clear my head, but people kept glancing at me in a synchronized way. Not everyone, just enough that it forms a pattern if you map it. A man across the parking lot dropped his keys right when I started thinking about leaving town. That felt like a warning or maybe confirmation that movement is being tracked. Time is also slipping slightly. I lose small chunks like pages torn out of a notebook. I'll look at the clock, and then suddenly 40 minutes has passed, but I don't remember moving or doing anything. The lights feel brighter afterward, like something adjusted while I wasn't fully present. I wrote reminders on paper because paper is harder to alter, but I found one of my notes folded differently than how I left it, and the handwriting looked heavier, like someone pressed the pen harder while copying it. I live alone. There is no reason for that to happen. I'm starting to think this isn't surveillance in the normal sense. It feels more like calibration, like they are testing responses and adjusting variables around me to see what I notice and how I react. Conversations, sounds, advertisements, even weather alerts seem too specifically timed. I haven't slept properly because when I start to drift off, I hear my name almost spoken but not fully formed, like it's caught in someone's throat or coming through a bad speaker. The last time it happened, it sounded like it came from the inside of the room, instead of the outside of it. I checked everywhere. Closets, vents, behind furniture. Nothing but the air feels thicker at night, like it's crowded. I know someone reading this is going to say stress or carbon monoxide or paranoia. I already bought detectors. They're fine, or at least they say they are fine, but I don't know how much I trust devices anymore because devices are the easiest thing to change remotely. I tried calling a friend earlier, and halfway through the call, I couldn't tell if the pauses in conversation were normal or if he was receiving prompts. His responses felt slightly delayed, like subtitles catching up to dialogue. I hung up because I didn't know if continuing the conversation would give them more information about how I think. If this post gets removed or edited, then that confirms this is being filtered. If it stays up, I don't know if that means they want it visible or if they're watching who responds. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just need to document that something shifted and I noticed it. Things are too aligned, too responsive to internal thoughts. The world feels like it's leaning closer than it used to. If anyone else has noticed signals hidden in normal behavior or sudden synchronization between electronics, strangers, and media, please respond, but be careful how specific you are. I don't know which words trigger attention yet. I'm going to stay awake tonight and write down every sound and pattern I notice, so there's a record that can't be erased all at once. If I stop updating suddenly, it probably means they finished adjusting whatever they started. I live alone. That's important. I bought my house 2 years ago after my divorce. It's a narrow, 2-story place at the end of a cul-de-sac. Quiet neighborhood. Retirees mostly. The kind of streets where people bring your trash can up if you forget. I installed a Ring camera after someone opened my car door last night. Nothing stolen, just opened. That bothered me more than if they'd taken something. The camera faces the driveway and the front door. Motion alerts go straight to my phone. It worked fine. Too fine. The first weird notification came last Tuesday at 2:14 a.m. Motion detected. Front door. I was in bed, awake, scrolling. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe my neighbor's cat. I opened the app. The clip loaded. It was me, walking up my driveway. Same gray hoodie I was wearing right then. Same black gym shorts. Barefoot. Head slightly down, like I usually walk when I'm tired. I watched myself walk up to the front door. Pause for a second like I was listening to something inside, and then the clip ended before I reached for the handle. My stomach dropped. I was in bed. I was literally under my blanket, watching myself outside. I checked the timestamp. 2:14 a.m. That was current, not old footage. I told myself it had to be an old recording that glitched and resent as new. Tech screws up sometimes. I even laughed a little. Then my phone buzzed again. Motion detected. Front door. Another clip. I hit play immediately. This time the driveway was empty, but the front doorknob was slowly turning. I couldn't hear anything. Ring only records video. No audio on motion unless it's triggered manually. The knob twisted left, then right, then stopped. I stared at my bedroom door. I live alone. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep in my closet, divorce gift to myself, and walked to the top of the stairs. Every light downstairs was off. The house was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't go down. I locked my bedroom door and didn't sleep. The next morning, I checked the full recording history. There were more clips. Dozens, all from the last 3 weeks. All of me coming home. Different nights, different clothes, sometimes holding groceries. Once carrying a pizza box. Once on the phone. The problem? In every clip, I walked up to the door, and then never unlocked it. The videos always cut before I reached for my keys, like I never went inside. But I obviously did. I was inside. I had memory of those days. I remembered buying that pizza. I remembered being on that phone call. I scrubbed through one clip frame by frame. In the one where I'm holding groceries, I pause at the door again, head tilted slightly, like I'm listening. And then for one frame, just one, the door is slightly open. Open inward, like someone inside pulled it. But the next frame, closed again. I called Ring support. They said there was no sign of tampering, no duplicate devices logged in, no playback errors. Looks like standard motion detection footage, the guy told me. I didn't mention that the person in the footage was wearing what I was currently wearing. That night, I tested something. At 10 p.m. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and stood on the driveway in full view of the camera. I waited. My phone buzzed. Motion detected. Front door. I watched live as I stood there on screen. I waved. The video waved back. Everything normal. Then, on the live feed, I saw something move behind the glass of the front door. Inside my house. A shadow crossing the hallway. I don't have pets. I don't have roommates. The shadow stopped at the door, right where the handle is. On the live feed, I watched the knob turn, slowly, from the inside. I wasn't breathing. The door cracked open about an inch, darkness inside, and then, on the live feed, I saw myself step into frame from inside the house. Same hoodie, same shorts. But barefoot was wrong. The version inside was wearing my work boots. He leaned close to the door crack, peering out at the version of me standing in the driveway. At me. The outside me. The one holding my phone. The one watching. The one who realized something horrible. Every single video in my history wasn't showing me coming home. It was showing him leaving. The inside one. The one who waits until I leave the house. The one who stands just out of sight when I'm home. The one who opens the door from the inside. He tilted his head, exactly the way I do when I'm listening. And then he smiled. I don't smile like that. The version of me outside, the live me, stumbled backwards in the driveway. I dropped my phone. When I picked it up, the live feed was frozen. Connection lost. I ran. I got in my car barefoot and drove to a motel 30 minutes away. I haven't gone back, but the notifications haven't stopped. Every night at 2:14 a.m. Motion detected. Front door. I don't open them anymore. Except last night. Last night, I made the mistake. It wasn't the driveway. It wasn't the door. It was my motel room, camera angle low, like from the floor, pointed at the bed, at me, sleeping. And at 2:14 a.m. exactly, the door to the motel room slowly opened. From the inside. I'm going to begin with some disclaimers, as the title of this post is a little misleading. First, I'm not 100% certain of the count. I was for a long while, but I have to concede that there is now a margin of error of at least ±5. This is despite my best efforts to remember, and I'm unnerved by this evidence of my mental slippage. More on that later. Despite this lack of certainty, I've been denoting the last few posts of mine as day 5000. They seem to do better when the title includes a round number. I'm not entirely sure why I care about something like that. Maybe it just feels good to engage in something as human as attention-seeking. It helps as well to imagine that I have some agency in determining the size of the audience that reads my testimony. It helps even more to indulge in the fantasy that, one day, someone with some esoteric/occult expertise will reply with a method of escape. Of course, this is all just my way of coping. I've long since come to terms with my fate. Second, I'm only making my best guess with the word demon. I suppose I could have said, I've been trapped in a time loop by an otherworldly entity, but that doesn't have the same ring to it. It also didn't get the post as much traction as when I've described it as a demon or devil. I have a lot of these little games. Another one involves tracking which phrasings/details attract which commenters. There is one guy who will reply if I mention the city I live in. Another will only say anything if I lie, and write that I've been trapped for 1,000 years. Novelty has become a rare resource necessary for my survival, so please excuse any random detail in this post as part of my regimented sanity protocol. As I was saying, I have no idea if my captor is actually a demon or anything of that sort. That being said, I don't think the term is entirely off base. I'm not religious, especially not anymore, but this thing definitely fits the description of what I'd imagine a demon would look like and act like. I've thought long and hard about it, and demonic parasite is the best explanation I can provide for the identity of the creature standing at the corner of my room right now. But I'll never know for sure. It could be an alien, or a ghost, or some escaped laboratory experiment for all I'm aware. It's not like it would tell me. It's only spoken a handful of times, none of which have made me believe that it has any intention of explaining itself to me. I know even less about how it found me and trapped me in the loop to begin with. I didn't explore some ancient abandoned temple and get cursed. This isn't the tragic result of some Faustian bargain with a cryptic stranger, or the ironic backfiring of a monkey's paw wish. In fact, I've always held it as a vague rule not to mess with things that I don't understand. I'm a cautious person by nature, and had gone through life taking any opportunity I could to reduce risk, or avoid getting caught up in anything dangerous. But it didn't mean a thing in the end. The only explanation I can provide as to how I've ended up here isn't an explanation at all. It's a brute fact. I am profoundly unlucky. I've spent years thinking about that day, about this day, and haven't been able to pinpoint anything at all that, if I had changed, would have saved me from this fate. My getting sealed away in time was just a freak accident, no different than a plane crash or a tsunami. If creatures like this exist, and they do, it means that some unlucky guy is going to end up in their line of sight by sheer happenstance. I can only imagine that I was standing on some extra-dimensional psychic fault line in the wrong place at the wrong time, and have now been swallowed whole by something awful. A child sticking out their tongue during a snowstorm is bound to catch at least one snowflake, even if millions of others will find the ground safely. I suppose the snowflake melts quickly, sparing it from a fate like mine. A lot of the beginning is getting hazy, but I still remember the first loop very clearly. I actually didn't notice anything was wrong for the first few hours of the day. I woke up pretty early, so I guess my head was still foggy enough that I didn't recognize the date on my phone was the day prior. On my morning commute to class, I began to squint while admiring the sunrise through the window across from me on the train. The way the sun reflected off the water looked oddly familiar, like I had seen it in a dream or a movie. This vague déjà vu only hardened into quiet terror once I arrived at the library. As a grad student, I was there to get some work done on my thesis prior to my first class of the day. Upon opening the document, however, I was met with none of the additions I had made the night prior. Terrified that I had lost all of my progress, I checked the edit history only to find that the most recent edit on the document was the night before last. Before I could react properly to this, I was interrupted by my friend John walking towards me. "Back here so soon? You really can't keep burning the candle at both ends like this," he said with a smirk, pulling up a chair next to mine. "I suppose I can keep you company." My eyes widened in shock as I turned my head to slowly face him. He had said this yesterday. This had happened yesterday. This moment, this exchange, those words in that order. My heartbeat slowly started to quicken as I mumbled something barely coherent and motioned to get out of my seat. After making a beeline for the door to get some fresh air and calm down, I took some deep breaths before checking my phone. 8:37 a.m., February 24th. Those deep breaths were of little use as I began to hyperventilate. Today was supposed to be the 25th. I knew that with more certainty than I might have for other days, because the 25th is my father's birthday. I had spent the night prior editing a video of all of my family members wishing him a happy birthday. I was supposed to send it sometime today, but today was yesterday. I collapsed to the ground, my body revolting against this disgusting truth. Through ragged breaths, only one thought kept racing through my mind. This cannot be happening. But it was happening. I spent the next few hours fighting off a psychotic break as I made my way through the crowded city, asking people periodically for the date. It was February 24th each time without exception. Every instance of confirmation worsened the stinging, restrictive feeling deep in my chest. I eventually resolved that this might just be a solitary glitch in the Matrix type of occurrence. This was a lone hiccup, and I'd get to rejoin the flow of time upon waking up tomorrow morning. Those dreams were crushed when I woke up the following February 24th, holding my head in my hands for hours after checking my phone. This is when things start to get blurry. I remember my first few months in broad strokes, but the details are starting to fade. I know that my first stage of grief is the face of eternity. Denial consisted of determining what lesson I needed to learn in order to free myself from what I still believed was some cosmic punishment. I meditated, went back to church, called old girlfriends, anything I could think of that might lead to some form of reconciliation. None of it did a thing. After a while, believing that I could somehow free myself through my own efforts, became an overbearing curse instead of a beacon of hope. I instead began to give myself over to the loop, exploring the new avenues for entertainment that had opened up for me. I'd find out exactly which strings of words would make John, my professors, or eventually even the girl sitting next to me on the train laugh, cry, or fall in love with me. I found out how to convince them I was stuck in a loop, and got a sick sense of catharsis watching their faces twist into warped expressions of horror and grief. It felt a little gross at first, to know more about these people than their closest loved ones, but I got over that moral hang-up. I got over a lot of moral hang-ups. Swimming in deep time will do that to you. My entertainment in those early months and years extended far beyond exhausting every dialogue option with the people in my path. My body resetting every day meant that I could try whatever drugs I wanted without building up any sort of tolerance or chemical addiction. The fear of overdosing wasn't a limiting factor either, as any time I did, I would just wake up in my bed at the start of another February 24th. I had to have spent at least 6 months trying heroin for the first time. I look back fondly, if not foggily, at those days. Instead of running up against addiction, it was boredom that curtailed my drug use. It was a surreal experience to look at a heroin needle with nothing but apathy in my heart. I must have been the only human alive to have ever gotten tired of hard narcotics. Hedonism is just escapism at its core, and escapism is only worth anything when there's a reasonable belief that you could actually escape whatever you're trying to avoid. With no such possibility available to me, even the most seemingly adrenaline-filled activities would eventually become dull and even annoying. Maybe some of you could shoot up for eternity, but I got sick of it. I got sick of violence too. You can only throw a haymaker at your professor during the middle of class, or assassinate the mayor so many times before you become desensitized and over the whole thing. Humans are inherently drawn towards meaning, and the more time washed over me, the more I realized that this overcast day in February had absolutely none to offer me. My memory is the most spotty for the next stage of my imprisonment. As thrill-seeking gave way to a melancholic haze, I stopped caring about my situation, no longer trying to escape or enjoy my new life. I just refused to engage with it altogether. I spent what must have been decades just lying in my bed, barely thinking about anything. Do you know what it feels like to go that long without any desire to eat food? Without the faintest urge to lift your head off your pillow? I was already dead to the world the moment I became trapped, but I was now thoroughly dead to myself. I had tried offing myself before I became voluntarily bedbound, but every 500-foot free fall towards the concrete ended the same way, with my alarm jolting me awake as I let out a guttural scream. This was my next best alternative. I planned to lie there indefinitely, hoping that the more nothing I experienced, the less conscious I would become. Near the end, it was starting to work. I began to feel less like a sentient creature and more like someone's memory of one. It was almost as if my awareness itself was being siphoned off, like I was losing what made me aware that I could lose things. At some point during this self-induced cognitive decline, however, something primal within me latched on to the clumping of shadows in the corner of my room. It felt instinctual, like my amygdala had successfully identified a threat for the first time in an eternity. It had been impossibly long since I had consciously focused my eyesight on anything, but this sudden burst of brain activity returned me to a state where I desired to unblur my vision and focus it on those shadows. My eyes widened in terror when I was finally able to see what was actually standing mere feet away from me. It was a tall, muscular, humanoid figure with coarse, charcoal gray skin, with its head mere inches from the ceiling. It stood facing me, blocking the door to my room. It wore nothing except for a thick black cloth tied around its waist. Even when I had focused my eyes, the outline of the creature still appeared fuzzy, like it was perpetually in my peripheral vision. It had no eyes. The top of its head instead featured a large patch of wrinkled skin, like that of an elbow, except the lines were far deeper. Despite the lack of eyes, I was certain it was intently focused on me. It had no nose either, only an enormous ear-to-ear smile revealing rows of ragged black teeth. It drooled out of its grinning mouth, thick strands of saliva hanging from its lips. It must have realized I was looking at it, as it let out 4 words in a quiet, breathy voice. "Go back to sleep. Although its words were barely whispered, it was like each one penetrated my soul with unadulterated malicious intent. I knew why it was drooling. I understood right then and there that this was a predator, and I was its prey. I didn't listen to its command. I don't think I could have even if I wanted to at this point. The influx of shock and sensation coursing through my body after ages of nothingness felt like a bucket of freezing cold water on my entire nervous system. I sat there, frozen, eyes widened in horror and fixed on this thing. But as I stayed laser focused on the creature, it started to become more and more blurry. It was like it was dissolving the longer I stared at it. This continued until it became nothing more than the odd clump of shadows I had originally identified. After remaining on my bed for what felt like hours, I finally gathered the courage to walk through them. Nothing happened. I started to live again after that first encounter. I wasn't completely sure why. Maybe because escapism came back into fashion once I had an experience I would do anything to forget. I tried to imagine that it was just a consequence of my mind melting, that it was merely the death rattle of my subconscious. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was real, and my intuition was telling me that I owed my decades of torment to the creature in the corner of my room. But why had I never seen it before? Why wouldn't it just harvest my soul or drag me to hell? Or its mothership, or wherever, and just get it over with? Here is what I know. This creature, this demon, doesn't eat in a traditional sense. It has seemingly no interest in its victim's body. It only cares about the mind. Furthermore, it's only interested in minds that are desolate and inactive. This is the only way I can make sense of that first encounter and subsequent appearances. Now, you would then imagine its ideal meal would be a brain-dead hospital patient, right? But this can't be the case. I was a budding intellectual pursuing a graduate degree in evolutionary anthropology, and it still chose to wear me down instead of feasting on an already broken mind. I have to conclude then that this demon is not a scavenger. It hunts, and the loop is how. In my old life, I spent a lot of time researching humanity's origin. Most people attribute our evolutionary success and dominion over the natural world to our enhanced intelligence. But this is only part of the story. Early humans were endurance hunters. We had the highest stamina of any land mammal in the world. We would stalk our prey relentlessly, giving them no respite to catch their breath or recover from any sustained injuries. We were an all-encompassing, oppressive force of death and despair for any poor guy that crossed our path. It didn't matter what you did. We would catch you eventually. I was previously under the assumption that this was a unique, evolutionary niche, that we were the only creature that hunted this way. I know better now. Even psychopaths can be tortured using solitary confinement. A space devoid of any novelty or purpose will eventually lead to a mind of insanity. The loop is my cell. It is the mechanism by which the demon means to hollow out my skull, to lead me to functional brain death. I have no way of knowing whether this is something necessary for its digestive process, like cooking raw meat, or something optional meant to add flavor, like adding seasoning. Either way, this is how it chooses to go about its hunt, and it almost succeeded. This, of course, is only my working theory as to what is occurring, but it's substantiated by what has occurred since our first interaction. Upon my return to the world outside my bedroom, I began to notice changes in the normal sequence of events I was accustomed to. It was subtle at first, but when you've lived the same day thousands of times, you pick up on every imperceptible detail. John would walk a little slower towards me in the library, or the sun would be a little lower and dimmer in the sky than it should have been on my train ride. This worsened as time went on. With things becoming increasingly empty and dull, I'd reach for a new book at the library, only to find that all the pages were blank. I'd try to shout obscenities at a stranger for a reaction, only for them to walk right past. The sky, the buildings, and the trees all started to fade into a dark gray. All the while, I would continue to see clumpings of shadows on the edges of my peripheral vision, taking a more solid shape if I continued to ignore them. It's my understanding that the demon is tightening its grip on the loop upon failing to secure the kill in my bedroom. It's lowering the bandwidth on the whole thing, systematically removing any source of stimulation I can use to keep myself sane. It hates when I'm distracted, when I'm engrossed in anything that allows me to forget my situation for even a moment. I was reading one of the non-empty books one day, particularly gripped by the main character's internal monologue. I didn't reach the end of the page before I heard a single word whispered from directly behind me. It was still in a hushed tone, but still far more forceful than when I had first heard it speak. Stop. This is how I've come to surmise that it wants me docile and brainless. That same day, I wrote my first post on here. It was short and took the form of a cry for help more than a testimony. But I did it again the next day. It felt good to give a voice to my struggle. This brings us to now. I've spent the last 5,000-ish days doing everything I can to stave off the inevitable mental decline, with my daily posts being a key component in my sanity protocol. The protocol is simple, but I follow it to the letter. It really just amounts to spending each day engaging in as much novel stimulus as possible. Books, movies, creative writing, and even reading all of your experiences on here. I've walked into each building in my city and explored it fully. I know how to speak 10 languages. I'm currently working on Icelandic. I have a graduate level grasp of quantum physics. If I were to return to the normal flow of time, I'd be a bona fide polymath. But I'm not. I'm a death row inmate. The protocol has had to undergo some alterations as fewer and fewer resources of novelty become available. One day, I woke up to find that entering the URL for any streaming service returned nothing but a black screen. So did Wikipedia, which was a particularly brutal loss. I've had to resort to analog media for most of my stimulus. Vinyl records, VHS tapes, the works. I've always liked old stuff though, and there are plenty of stores in my city that sell vintage gear. These days, the cashier won't even say or do anything if I blatantly shoplift. I'm grateful that this website still works, and I'm able to continue to share my testimony. Writing my story takes up several hours of each day, but it is essential. It's how I retain my memories regarding what has happened and who I am. Without daily repetition of my situation, I would have long since gone insane. But I can't keep this up forever. I know that, eventually, the demon will catch on, and my records won't make any sound. Eventually, every book I open will be blank. I might even lose my mind before that happens. Cracks have been forming in the last year. I didn't want to admit it for a while, but my recent loss of count regarding these posts finally made me confront it. Some days it'll take me longer than it should to remember John's name, or to recall that tomorrow is my dad's birthday. His name isn't spelled like that. It's John. Have I really been writing it like this the entire time? Case in point, I'm slipping. It's going to win eventually, and it knows it. Even now, I can see the faint outline of a smile in my peripheral vision. That gross, smug smile. There came a point in this cycle where I wanted to die, to fade away, but the more I came to understand what was actually happening to me, the greater the urge to fight became. This didn't just happen to me out of nowhere. I owe what I estimate to be almost a century of suffering to this demon. It's his fault. I have no idea how many people it has damned to this sick fate in the past, and I don't know how long it took for all of them to break. But I won't go quietly. I'll spit on the carpet as I'm dragged through hell. I'll elongate this process as long as I possibly can. If all I can do in the face of this otherworldly evil is inconvenience it, then that's what I'll do. I am Sisyphus, and the rock hates me, but I hate the rock even more. What is the fly thinking about as it dissolves in the mouth of the Venus flytrap? Does it earnestly believe that it has a chance to fight back? I suppose we'll never know. I'll see you all tomorrow. When I was just a young fella, my mama gave me a guitar for my 10th birthday. She had gotten the old acoustic secondhand, spent all her tip money from the diner on it. The thing was worn and couldn't hold a tune for anything. It sat awkwardly on my little lap, much too big for a boy my age. But it was a gift from my mama, and I loved my mama. So I loved it. I played it every day. You keep up your playing, boy, and one day you'll make something great of yourself. She used to say as I fumbled around the fretboard. We couldn't afford lessons, so as I got older I would go downtown and watch the street performers play. If I ever had $1, I would put it in one of their jars and ask them for tips. I was determined. I never wanted to be a rock star, and learning the guitar didn't change that. I didn't really care much for the idea of being famous. I just wanted to be good at something. Necessity will change a man. As I aged, life had treated me poorly, and that was mostly my own fault. I was never much for schooling. Managed to squeeze through high school by the skin of my teeth, but college was out of the question. Holding down a 9 to 5? Hell, that wasn't for me either. I didn't have the work ethic or the academic drive. But what I did have was my music. To my own credit, I had never stopped playing that guitar, and now I could play it pretty good. Music wasn't making me rich, but it was putting food on the table. I played on the streets and in local bars and restaurants. I drew in a big enough crowd for the establishments to keep inviting me back, and between the free food and drinks and the tips, I was earning a living. I knew Mr. Carwile was trouble the moment he approached me. The look in his eyes when he shook my hand said it all. He wasn't looking at an equal, but a tool, an opportunity. I should have told him to kick rocks, but my set had ended and I was a couple of beers deep, and in an amicable mood, so I heard him out. Mr. Carwile and his associates owned a small club and casino in town, and he told me I could be their house musician for the lounge. I would get to play multiple nights weekly, whenever there wasn't an out-of-town act booked. I gotta admit it sounded great. I was still going to get free food and drinks, but I would finally have the promise of an consistent paycheck, in addition to any tips. Wesley said I even get a monthly bonus for house chips to use in the casino. That was an obvious trap, and I walked right into it. Gambling was a vice that I didn't have the skill set to feed. I burned through my bonuses like wildfire every month. Before long, I started putting my own money into the casino. I was addicted. Eventually, Mr. Carwile offered me some advice, and like an idiot, I accepted. My debt piled up, and by the time I realized it was a problem, they pulled the rug on me. One day the lounge needed a musician. The next day it didn't. I was informed that since I was no longer an employee, I needed to pay back what was owed, immediately. When I couldn't, some guys showed up to my house and worked me over real good. An ugly guy with a lazy eye held me down on my own kitchen table and put my fingers in a pair of meat shears. I cried real tears for the first time in a decade and begged him not to take my fingers. Those boys laughed at my misery and took everything of value I had. They told me I had a month and left me with nothing, just the clothes on my back and my mama's guitar. In the backwoods of Mississippi, when all hope is gone and a man is truly at his wit's end, there's only one thing left for him to do. On a dusty crossroad, I stood in the dead of night and offered up the only thing I had left, spilling my blood into dirt. The Bible says the devil comes like a roaring lion, but the one that appeared before me took the form of a smiling shadow. He answered my call with a look of bemusement on his face. I held out that old acoustic and I pleaded. I wanted the fame. I needed the fame. Without it, I was a dead man. Laughter boomed like rolling thunder throughout the valley as that old serpent rejected my proposal. Mama, bless her soul, had gotten me baptized as an infant. Wretch of a man that I was already spoken for. He wanted nothing to do with me. My plight was my own. I was busking outside a local pub when they caught up to me again. Devil or not, I tried my damnedest to make back what I owed. But it still wasn't enough. My fists were balled tight as they kicked and stomped me into the curb. They could break my body, but I couldn't let them take my fingers. Maybe my head was going loopy from the beating, but as those gorillas kicked my stuff in, I swore I saw that shadow at their backs, watching, laughing. I said a silent, infernal prayer, offering up one last plea, one final bargain to the powers beyond the veil, before prostrating myself at the feet of my assailants. "Wait, please, just let me play one more time," I croaked, breath ragged from the abuse they had laid out on my ribcage. "One more show. Let me play one more and I swear I can make back what I owe. Please." Greed outweighed malice that day and earned me a stay of execution. I was walking with a limp when I pulled myself onto the stage at the lounge. It took only a moment to realize that I was in a den of lions. Mr. Carwile and his associates were in the audience, along with their muscle and some friends, and high rollers that had earned their good graces. Not a single paying audience member was in attendance. A final joke at my expense. I limped over to the house equipment and picked up the black Les Paul from its stand. "Hold on there, son," Mr. Carwile called to me, a sneer on his face. "You don't work here anymore. That's house equipment. You gotta use your own." I saw the shadow in the back of the room, smiling. It nodded at me, and a determined grin crept onto my face. I picked up Mama's guitar and began to play. I laid down a mean line with the bass strings, the meanest line I had ever licked. The droning rhythm crunched and growled, distorting to my whim. I was playing Mama's old acoustic, but it didn't matter. My wish had been granted. The rhythm boomed over the lounge like it was backed by a full PA system. I had a demon in my strings now, and I was going to let it out. The audience's eyes grew wide at my performance, the rhythm needling its way into their mind, into their souls. A young man in the front row perked up first, fresh out of college, high on life, buying his way to the top with daddy's money. He had a pretty little thing on his arms, and they were both froth and desire. I could see it in their eyes. They pawed and ripped at each other's garments and crawled onto the stage. He took her raw right at my feet, rutting like a buck in heat as I picked up the tempo, moans of pleasure mixed with the wails of my finger picking as I played a melody, leading the pair closer and closer to completion. I cut their climax short with an abrupt pinch harmonic. The guitar screeched and an unholy sound echoed throughout the room. The couple's moans of pleasure transformed to cries of pain. The young man gave in to darker desires and wrapped his arms around that girl's throat and began to squeeze. I started back in with my bass line. The woman screamed and clawed at him, her own desire twisting to hate. She fought back with ferocity, gouging his eyes and leaving his face in ruin before he crushed her windpipe. The whole room sat entranced, but the fixers and the hitmen were the next to fully lose themselves to my spell. My fingers bled as I ripped a mournful arpeggio out over the crowd. All the greed and lies, the violence and betrayals, it all churned within them and boiled over, their worst selves being forced to the surface at the whim of my playing. The demon I turned loose, wrenched at their souls and whispered blasphemy into their minds, coercing them to act on their most base desires. Those evil men who got a twisted pleasure from breaking bones and tearing flesh in the name of the almighty dollar now turned that rage onto one another. With knives and bare fists, they tore each other apart and decorated my stage in blood. I didn't even need to improvise anymore. I just kept the droning rhythm coming. The room was too far gone now. I stepped to the side as two men rolled onto the stage. The guys that had beaten me in the street now wrestled with one another. They grappled and twisted for control, intent to kill clear in their eyes. I smiled as the lazy-eyed guy that had taken so much pleasure in my tears lost his grip and ended up on the bottom. The other man straddled him now and turned his face into an unrecognizable pulp, beating his knuckles raw into Lazy Eye's skull to the tune of my guitar. Gun smoke filled the air. The executives and the higher-ups were turning on each other, generations of backstabbing slime, now convinced they had to kill off the competition. I watched as one old man's skull erupted from behind, a hollow point fragmented in his cranium, and sprayed the room with bits of bone and brain matter. His business associate turned executioner laughed in glee, only to meet the same fate at the hands of another, the next row back. Mr. Carwyle rose and approached the stage. A man who never thought of me as a person, a man who wouldn't have let me lick the crap from his shoes if it saved me from starving, now knelt at my altar of depravity. I let the guitar wail as he slit his own throat at my feet. I kept playing until every one of them fell to the music, finally stopping when only myself and the shadow remained. The silence felt thick as I looked over the carnage from the stage. The lounge had been transformed into an unholy abattoir. Their blood, their tears, their seed, they had spilled it all for me and now lay in ruin. The devil may not have wanted me, but I had offered him a different bargain. When he followed me into that pit of sin and saw the evil dwelling in the hearts of those men, well, he just couldn't resist. I felt the room grow cold as the shadow offered up a single round of applause, grin spreading wider than ever. I tipped my head, giving a polite bow, and exited the stage. The devil took his souls, and I took my leave. I'm still not famous. Our bargain was a one-time deal, or so I thought. Sometimes when I'm playing, I can see that look start to creep back into certain faces out in the crowd. I've had to cut so many performances short that now I just stick to playing in the streets. They say you can never know what's really inside a person, but I can, and the truth is ugly. The devil hangs over me like a vulture, waiting to snatch the carrion left in my wake. Sometimes when there's a particularly vile crowd, I'll finish my set and feed the old guy. Maybe that's his hold on me, twisting my own hatred just enough to play the role of judge. I know I'm lucky to have my soul, but I want to be free again. Guess there's a bit of that greed in all of us. I've never been big on books or computers, but I'm out here doing my research now. A bona fide holy man is harder to find than you might think. I'm going to keep looking, and any help you can all provide is appreciated. Until then, if you ever hear a man playing on the streets of Mississippi, put $1 in his jar. You might be buying me lunch. It's not ideal, but I'm going to keep on keeping on, with the devil at my back and a demon in my strings. Every summer, like clockwork, my friend's grandparents would leave town for a week and trust her to stay in their house alone. Usually a few of us would come over so she wouldn't have to sleep there by herself. But this time she grinned and said, "Let's have a party." We were in 7th grade. The party was just all of us crammed into an oversized sleepover, high on junk food and freedom. Her grandparents' house was old, the kind of old that creaked even when no one was moving. 3 stories. The basement stairs opened directly off the living room. No door, just a dark staircase that dropped into the ground like an open mouth. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The air always felt slightly colder up there. That night, we were in one of the upstairs bedrooms changing into our swimsuits, laughing too loud, not thinking about anything except getting to the pool. We left all of our bags and clothes scattered across the room and ran outside. After a few hours swimming, we came back in, dripping water across the hardwood floors, and headed upstairs to change. One of the girls grabbed the bedroom handle. It didn't turn. She jiggled it harder. Locked. At first we thought someone was joking, but then we noticed something. The lights were off. That room didn't connect to a wall switch. The only way to turn the lights off was by pulling the string on the ceiling fan. You had to be inside the room to do it. All of our stuff was in there. None of us had a key, and the locks in that house were old and stubborn, nearly impossible to mess with. No one would have locked it. There was no reason to. Still, the door wouldn't budge. After arguing about it for a few minutes, we convinced ourselves we'd deal with it later. Her grandparents would be back in a few days anyway. It felt easier to ignore it than to think too hard. She gave us oversized t-shirts from her grandpa's closet to sleep in, and we piled into the living room to watch scary movies. The irony didn't hit us at the time. Eventually, one by one, everyone fell asleep. Except for me and 3 others. The house had gone quiet. That deep, late-night quiet where every tiny sound feels amplified. That's when we saw Ed. He slowly stood up from the couch. His eyes were closed. He moved stiffly, like he was being pulled forward by something we couldn't see. Without a word, he walked toward the basement stairs. And I should say this. That house had been in her family for generations. People had died there. In the basement, they kept urns. Multiple urns. Ed reached the top of the basement stairs and stopped. He stood there, completely still, facing down into the darkness. He didn't sway. He didn't blink. He just stood there. Minutes passed. None of us moved. None of us spoke. It felt like if we made a sound, something at the bottom of those stairs would answer. Then, slowly, without opening his eyes, Ed turned around, walked back to the couch and laid down, like nothing had happened. We didn't sleep much after that, but eventually exhaustion won. In the morning, we asked him what he was doing at the stairs. He looked genuinely confused. He didn't remember getting up, and he didn't sleepwalk. That answer sat wrong in my stomach. We tried to brush it off. Daylight makes everything feel smaller. A few hours later, parents started arriving to pick everyone up. Amber's parents were first. She walked toward the front door, then froze. On the floor right in front of the door was her bag. We were absolutely certain her belongings were still in that room. She was still wearing her wet swimsuit under one of the oversized t-shirts. If her bag had been downstairs the night before, she would have changed. The bedroom door upstairs was still locked. The light was still off. No one could explain how her things got there. At that point, the excuses started to crumble. Everyone left eventually. The house felt bigger once it emptied out. Later that day, her sister asked if she could babysit her baby nephew. He was only 7 or 8 months old, for a few hours. My friend didn't want to be alone in that house again. She asked me to stay the night. I said yes. The baby was dropped off. We played with him for hours until he finally fell asleep in a pack and play in the living room. We put on a movie and, despite everything, we both drifted off. I don't know what time it was when we woke up, but we woke up at the exact same moment. Not slowly, not groggy. We woke up in panic. Both of us shot upright and looked at the pack and play. It was empty. The baby was gone. The kind of fear that hits you when something is deeply, horribly wrong. That's what flooded my body. We tore through the house, calling his name even though he was too young to answer. We searched the kitchen, the bathroom, the basement stairs, refusing to look too far down. Then we ran upstairs. We reached the locked bedroom. My friend grabbed the handle. It turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the lights were on. And there, in the middle of the room that had been locked the night before, the room where you had to physically pull the string to turn on the light, was the baby. Safe. Sitting there. We didn't question it. We didn't try to rationalize it. We didn't even go back downstairs for our things. We called her mom to come get us. We refused to stay another minute in that house. Years have passed. I don't talk to any of the people who were there that night anymore, but every time I'm in the city, I drive past that house. And even from the street, I feel it, like something inside is still awake.